Okay, welcome to another episode of the Thanos Node podcast. And today I have Oskars Jepsis with us. Oskar is an experienced digital entrepreneur with several startup experiences in the KYC AML solutions industry vertical. He's also the co-founder of Alter. Before co-founding Alter, Oskar gained experience in the largest Scandinavian bank that manages worldwide banking relationships with entities such as JP Morgan, Citigroup, HSBC, Bank of America, SEK currency-based financial products, and more. He was also the former manager that led one of the largest peer-to-peer platforms to take care of onboarding, operations, and API integrations. Now he's fully dedicated to Web3, and for the last couple of years has been building solutions, leading ecosystems, and deploying user-first tools that enables participants enter the Web3 and decentralized ecosystem with the lowest barrier to entry while ensuring privacy, security, and usability. So welcome, Oskar.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome and also for the intro.
Yes,
a lot of titles, but don't follow the titles. I'm always a very present person, and most likely I don't speak much more about my history. But when somebody asks, then I will deliver it to them.
That's awesome. That is actually that's a very, very keen keen statement. So I've always been curious because, we've been through Web 1, we've been through Web 2, and we're at Web 3 now. And the gap between each turning gets shorter. So Web 1 to Web 2 was over about 15 or so years. Web 2 to Web 3 was about 8. Now Web 3 is evolving towards what I even arguably Web 4, which is decentralized networks, because we've solved for access, we've solved for distribution. Now we're solving for ownership. And I've always said that for freedom and privacy to exist, it has to be decentralized. It has to be decentralized, that is. I wanted your take on that, General, because I know in Europe, for example, privacy is a very big thing. It's a very big deal there. And unfortunately, I think in our part of the world, privacy is monetized, basically. And I think you guys are on the forefront of changing that. I wanted your take on that, generally, from your experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything started with digitalization, and especially when the COVID struck. I mean, that kind of forced people to be more online. So that means if people are more online, they can definitely input a lot more into the internet itself. So we're actually the data givers at all time, and every single one who's even interacting with the internet is actually a potential candidate for getting the data from them. And even if you're just using, Facebook, Google, still all the searches that you're searching for, you're then being identified with so-called regularities or so-called sample that can be then followed up on your so-called personal interest. And those personal interests can be like a lot of things that you are doing online. So even though if you're using kind of like less applications and be kind of more offline person, but still you are interacting with your internet bank, you are interacting with your social media platforms, and of course you're providing them all such of data. And I would say every single corner is being definitely saved, and then basically it is being distributed to all these parties. Because if you ever check the so-called list of the privacy policy and also how data will be shared amongst hundreds of analytical companies that are using for either marketing directions, either for insightful for user capture, or just building up your profile of the internet. So And of course, if you don't use VPN, it's super easy for them to take your unique VPN that you're using from your home as so-called identity. And if you're using multiple devices and multiple members are actually using the same IP, then basically you're just providing this one sample identificator, and the story goes on. And the brutal thing is that even though they are now a bit more transparent about privacy policy, back then, actually, nothing was transparent. How the data was used and how was the data being transferred, I mean, nobody knows. So I would say now people are starting to care about it. Of course, also the GDPR that came into force in Europe that regulates the so-called individuals' data, not the companies, of course, but particularly individuals. And I would say that this is like a starting phase of taking your data back, taking the choice back of your data, who wants to receive it or who you want to share with. So, and I think the so-called big corporates and tech companies have used their this data that has been captured all these years for their financial benefit. And I would say now it is the time to really start taking the data back. And if you want to monetize, I think there should be an option also for you to monetize it. Otherwise, again, we are giving free data, personal data, maybe public, but still everything that we type is there.
Now, that's interesting, because that leads me to pivot a second. Knowing what you know now, knowing exactly all the things you know now, given your experience about privacy, data access, personal agency, and more, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say from privacy side on internet, definitely using VPN as day one. Of course, many people haven't used VPNs. Once I did learn it from my so-called friends online, then I started to use it. Another advice to my younger self would be definitely don't type ridiculous shit, and also don't post also images that could maybe reflect on your life later on and can be used against you. And definitely don't even register on Facebook. So those are like kind of my advices to myself.
That's very interesting, because that takes me back to my college days. And these were the early days of file sharing. And we had Trillian, we had ICQ chat, actually, and then Yahoo Messenger came, and then MSN Messenger. And then Napster came, Ares, and a few of those peer-to-peer sharing applications. And then we had NetDevil, another one. And on a college campus, you can just browse the entire network. All the computers on the entire campus. You can have anyone running a chat or peer-to-peer or music sharing application or Winamp. You could browse their computer so long as they're on the network. And I think back about, I think about that and I cringe. Like, wow, what the hell? Today that will be just wrong. That was interesting. Which leads me to another question. Given data is today's currency, are we really free?
I think it's a very philosophical question, and definitely that should be answered and explained. I wouldn't go into so many details, but I would say we're not free. We are tied to this digital age that if you don't take it up, you can basically go and live in the woods. There are two options in your life. Either participate in this or just go offline. And if you prefer going offline, well, basically, of course, you're free then. But then again, second question will come, how are you going to be sustaining yourself, your life, your goals, your aims from financial perspective? Of course, if you're growing your own food and you have your own place in the woods, again, you can escape it. But again, majority will not do it because they want to participate. They want to have financial goals. They want to have some things that they like to have. And of course, they're obtained by financial instruments. So basically, the money is actually giving, I would say, the freedom or prison. I tend to lean to more prison because then we are exposed. Then basically everything that we pay for digitally can be accessed, can be traced, and can be analyzed. And if it's possible to do that, then it means you're not free because those third parties, I don't know, governments, regulators, banks, all these so-called minorities are actually taking all of our insights and management over it, because also banks can freeze your assets, banks can question your transactions if you're complying with the laws and everything else that has been made up by themselves. So I would say the game is rigged. That's all. So I learned towards that we are not free.
Yeah, that's a heavy one because data is the currency for participation, and freedom is also the currency for participation, right? So you give up data in order to participate, right? You give up freedoms in order to participate. So at what point does it become rather, what's too much? Like, what else do people have to give up in order to participate? Because data, we know, your basic freedoms, we know, freedom to privacy, freedom of speech, all of these things. And where decentralization comes into play is that personal agency, it still requires a network, right? So if you think about blockchain, for example, or Bitcoin, tokens, whatever the case may be, without the network, all of it is useless. You can have $1 billion in your digital wallet, right? But if there's no connectivity, nothing's happening. So in a way, how that affects our freedoms now become, if given enough time, I think, if I may pivot for a second, do you think humans can change their behavior if given enough time?
I would say not everybody, like majority will not be changed. That is like, I would say from society and from scientific approach that so-called reprogramming takes a lot of time. It takes, I would say, 2 or 3 human lives to kind of accomplish something. But there are some individuals that are always kind of seeking for something new and open to alternatives. So that means, I would say, there are some part of the group that can be easily changed. And towards like blockchain technology, towards privacy, they will start to acknowledge it. They will start to use it. And in our daily lives, I would say our best goal is actually to just introduce more and more how blockchain can actually resolve and can pivot to another, I would say, technological advantage for the individual side, not for the big tech or for the big government institutions. So, but of course, it is, again, choices that people will need to make based on their research and trust. So if there's a trust and a movement, the more people will actually use it.
Wow.
What about yourself?
No, I think, time, the inevitability of time leads back to fundamental truths, right? So we think about change as a concept. Change usually takes 4 generations to go into full effect. There's an old saying that good times creates weak men. Weak men
exactly
create bad times. Bad times create strong men. Strong men create good times, which leads back to the creation of weak men. And when I use the term men, I mean men and women. That's a general concept. So as humans, I think those things are generational. I think they take time. They take a lot of mistakes, as we are seeing right now in just the world over, where you have a multi-generational effort to ensure equity, but largely being done the wrong way. I always say you can't shake hands with a clenched fist. We can't tell people how to think, what to take California, right? Go buy electric vehicles that you can't afford. Oh, by the way, you can't use electricity, right? I mean, who genius came up with that? So there's these things that it takes time. I do believe that humans can change behavior if given enough time. But the problem is the key word there is given. Who gives time? Who guarantees freedom? Who? Such locum of power is very dangerous because I am yet to see a human being. I'm yet to see a member of our species, right, have power and want to willingly give it back. So I do believe we can change, given enough time, our behaviors, but how much time?
And also, I think that time can actually be decreased if certain events happen. For example, CBDCs rolls out next year, for example. Step-by-step countries are introducing their electronic money. What means for the society? Society will question faster those things, and then they will faster get to alternatives, because CBDCs will be the next so-called cash that will be used only digitally. The same with cryptocurrencies. It is exactly the same. So actually this so-called introduction to digital currencies has been a major role for Web3 space. And now I would say countries are taking that advantage to take initiative on their end to create these CBDC platforms. And it is pretty interesting because Norway, for example, are using RC20, the EVM, as a so-called platform to build their own CBDC. Of course, it's on their private side and built by their own developers and blah, blah, blah. It will not be open source. It will not be something that could be checked, You just need to trust it, and it is the next step. So yeah, I mean, it's... I think you're muted.
No, I said trust them, they said.
Yeah, trust us. It will be okay. No, don't. So basically, trust us. We will not check every transaction, but we're going to see it. We will not control your wallets, but we're going to be controlling them, and so forth. So every transaction will be applicable with tax. Then every single transaction will be applicable with emissions. If you spend your so-called quota of the month by CO2. So basically, I don't know, you're buying gas. So let's say that 100 liters per month is the maximum that a person can buy for his gas engine car. And what will happen then? Are the people more free, or are these like kind of advantages of CBDCs are really giving advantage for the people? I think it is just another way how they can decrease our so-called participation in our own private life, and that's pretty crazy. Like, and then I just wondering, like, will people accept it freely?
That's very interesting. I believe that people accept certain things because they're comfortable. So let's take basic supply chain, right? People are comfortable. They go to the store, food is there. They turn on the switch, the light comes on, right? They turn on the TV, everything works, right? So long as the fundamentals are in place, most people are not going to react. They will just accept it as normal part of doing business. So if we think about the previous the generation that was born after 1996, they don't have the same freedoms that the generation before them had. And it keeps going back in that manner. To them, this is normal. So when the generation before them talks to them about the freedoms that they had before these ones were born, it's a foreign concept. So in a way, they don't even know that their freedoms are being eroded because they were born and raised in a time where those freedoms just didn't exist. So how can a government tell you that they can't see your transactions, but they can check it? How can you check something without seeing it? That's an oxymoron, right? So that's on one hand. On the other hand, we have this constant battle between, the quote unquote people and those who they elect to govern them. And those who are elected to govern are increasingly becoming those who determine how. Let's take Visa, for example. A few days ago, they announced they would start flagging all arms purchases. So if you go to a gun store, for example, in a country that allows gun sales, and you try to use your Visa or MasterCard, they flag it. So take that use case. If in 4 years from now, a new government comes into power, right? And they are all, vegetarians or vegans, and they say you can no longer buy meat. So they're going to call Visa and say, cancel all the sales of meat, right? Or another comes in and they say, if you share certain ideologies or you go to certain stores, you can buy. So the whole point is the locum of power. Will people accept it? The challenge is the more comfortable people are, the less resistant they are. It starts to affect them. They start to react. So until it becomes uncomfortable, until someone really pushes the envelope and says, unless you get your internet connection from this company, or unless you buy your food from that store, okay, unless you vote a certain way, you can't use your credit card, or unless you do, unless you meet certain conditions, you can't exercise your basic right to freedom, right to privacy, right to movement. You see what I mean? Until those restrictions starts to bite, I think most people are too comfortable to start reacting. Now, those who will react, unfortunately, are in the countries that the Western world doesn't see as advanced. You are more likely to get a reaction from countries in, say, Kenya or Venezuela, countries where the people feel the daily impact of their government's decisions. They are the ones that are more likely to react and resist the kind of tyranny than, say, Americans or Europeans, because they're just comfortable. They don't feel it. They don't feel that immediacy of it.
I actually can speak a bit where I come from and what's the history from the place I come from, because I think we're living in the same age, in the same very age. So I come from Latvia. It's one of the smaller Baltic states countries. In 1983, the so-called serfdom came into place. What is serfdom? So basically, you're abolishing in the provinces, for example, in so-called Latvia. Latvians are called Latvian peasants. They gain ostensible freedom, but they lose their land and become, in effect, and also endured servants to the so-called kingdom. Only around mid-century, Latvians obtained the right to buy a land, and also how it worked is that they give you this ostensible freedom, but you need to pay the so-called tax on your gains on product that you are growing, gains on trading. Everything was paid to so-called the local government, I would say. I would say nothing has changed in the past 200 years, less than 200 years globally. We still have our so-called government. We are paying everything that we gain and grow to them. So I have read so many books about our history and what kind of things people went through. I would say those times are more brutal because nobody was kind of controlling anything whatsoever. Like there were like no public media, no public sites that you can share this and ask somebody outside to help you. And I think it's the same concept as now. Now they want to take this so-called the so-called freedom, right, and transit to safety. Now the word will be safety. Safety for your health, safety for your finances, safety for your daily lives, and etc. And it's really crazy because, like, people understand from, like, majority of people understand where I come from, like, what was back then, what our grandparents went through, and also World War II, occupations in the country, several times in Latvia, for example. All those things we have incorporated in your mind that it is crazy and not acceptable. So it also comes in place, like, what is the history behind the person as well, how they can perceive this historical not value, but I mean experience to fight for a better future. Because I would say it is exactly the same. Nothing has changed. We are in a serfdom, and we are still living the so-called dream of it, that we are free.
That's actually interesting. It's a very powerful way to put it, because freedom is subjective and depends on how you define it. Times may change. Okay, infrastructure might improve. You might get different faces, but the concept remains the same. You know, in funny, humorous terms, you know, in the US, they always say different circus, same clowns, right? You know, it's this idea that I think people like the idea of freedom in principle, right? But in practice, it takes a lot of sacrifice in terms of fighting for it. And what we see is the fundamental difference between safety and security. Security is freedom. Safety is the idea of safety is temporary, right? Security is permanent. So you look at, you know, governments that determine what they think is right for you, right? They make your decisions for you. Give up everything and will put you in a tiny little flat. You get your subsidy. You know what I mean? You don't own anything. You don't own any land anymore. You don't own any track.
First, you get your passport and ID and all that bullshit. Because from my end, I was born in this world, and then basically all these magical rules applies to me because I was born. Why? I did not accept that. I did not sign it. Why I have this passport? Why these certain rules are applicable to me? I don't care. It's region is region, land is land, but why these laws are applicable from me, from my birth? Like that again is something that is a bit crazy when you think about it. That once you enter this world, you're applicable to some country's rule, and you have given out a passport that proves your identity of that country, and then other countries can verify your identity in a way and track you where you go and etc. Because I see it is a mob, much more than a mob, because at least mafia is, I would say, very family-like, that you trust it until the end, you know. Here, mobsters are like, all right, your mobster peasant is coming to our mob country land, so yeah, we're gonna check everything about them. Then we're gonna ask another mob family to provide these identity certificates and everything else. I would say it is pretty crazy where everything from the also identity side have been taken. So yeah, I think this is a world created just for us to be controlled, and there's definitely another world living on behind the scenes.
Yeah. So I think it's also the commoditization of humans, right? So you're basically, when you come into the world, you know, you have a passport ID and all that, you're on the assembly line, right?
Mm.
There's no personal agency. You didn't agree to anything, right? You're just there. Next. And when you get into census, population count, and all that, there's actually math formulas out there that analyzes unit of productivity. You know, they say this person, this age, that lives in a certain area, that went to school and studied this is what their lifetime value, when we do analysis on, you know, business planning, business modeling, financial modeling, there are models like that health insurance companies use before they determine how much you're going to pay for health insurance. You know, census bureaus, you know, population bureaus, you know, law enforcement, they look at that, and that determines how they value a company's bonds. So if the U.S. Treasury wants to issue bonds, all those formulas go in. Okay, what's the U.S. economy worth? Okay, the citizens in this demographic, in this area, with this degree, who went through these schools, you know, how much, you know, the more scientists you have. So it's very interesting. It's a very, very interesting thing. But going back to Web3, right? Do you think user experience is going to be the next big thing? You know, because we talk about blockchain adoption and all of that, and the biggest challenge has always been usability. You know, and I know that, you know, Alter, you guys have solved for a lot of that, and you continue to do so. Do you think UX will be the next big wave in Web3 as we build out of the bear market?
I think that will be the most highest value that every project could be, like, kind of solve. If they can solve this very friendly user experience on their applications, or user experience on building on the chain, on a network, they will have the best, biggest, I would say, attention and very successful things going on. Because I remember when I was very young, I used DC++. I would say majority of older generations will understand what it is. It was the first peer-to-peer, I would say, network where people share their files on a one single network on a protocol, and then throughout the user interface that is called DC++, I think it's still live there. You can still do it. You just connect through an IP, and then basically you can search stuff and download to your computer from different peers who have already downloaded, and just contributing to the uploading speed, so you can get that sooner. So I was pretty keen user there. My relative actually was one of the first Kickstarters and supporters there. He was providing massive amounts of gigabytes of different files there too. And it was like pretty nice. Like people say it's piracy, but I don't know. Piracy is actually something that you take away from another people and duplicate. Digital piracy doesn't exist. It's just, again, misleading interpretations. Of course, maybe somebody objected, but more than keen to discuss this topic. The user experience there back then was already, I would say, super complicated if you don't understand anything from, I would say, setting up the network, setting up the ports, setting up where to connect, and then basically use it and understand it. Like if blockchain technology, which is also peer-to-peer, can like make it so simple as the so-called Web2 world, who are just concentrating on user experience and they don't care like how data is being distributed and etc. They will get the most attention. Because I think the most biggest challenge is how these networks will be able to onboard companies and users without them creating a wallet. Because there will be need a way that either on their behalf or a certificate being issued that you can interact with the blockchain should be created. I would say this is the big next step. And we are actually working towards that on Altar side. We have already planned how it should run. Still having your wallet, still having your access, but you're not connected to certain things like you need MetaMask to download this extension. Then you have these difficult instructions how to create it. Then you need to write down your passphrases. You need to save them securely. Then you need to set up the passwords. Then you need to allow every single browser, every single application to approve. I would say if somebody says to me, this is the best user experience we can get, I say it's bullshit.
Very true. Yeah, I think UX is a continuous effort because as user behavior changes, we always, take that feedback and we make, the corresponding pivots or changes as necessary. So now, do you think crypto projects can be sustainable without relying on tokens? Because some projects have zero business model. They actually make money on their tokens than they do what they claim to do.
I think tokenization could potentially not connect it to the dollar value, but the tokenization can be connected to data value, can be connected to feature value, individual identities, etc. Because majority of them are more interested into dollar value than, I would say, utilities, features, and possibilities with it. If we change the tokenization to specific things to work and act, I don't know, like HR platform, each token, so basically you're tokenizing individuals. One token that is assigned, specific token gives to another person. So basically this token is then held on a wallet, cannot be transferred. Then he can use this token to share the access to the so-called tokenized data with employers, with specific maybe industry analysis who wants to take up the so-called employee working experience that could potentially be used for hiring, for better hiring and targeting. So I would say there are many kind of things that can be tokenized, but again, I think there should be a switch to not dollar value, but what is actually the data value. Because blockchain in general, I would say it is a next phase of data management, sharing, storing, auditing, verifications. That's the blockchain. That was what also Satoshi was leaning on to the use cases in the white paper of Bitcoin. It is not only a perceiving value of dollars or what. It is much more than that.
Yeah, and the issue I have, having been in this industry, as long as I have, is tokens make it so easy to bastardize the process. It's almost, you see, I would say 90 to 95% of projects that are tokenized have no business having a token. Unfortunately, the ease is so easy, to mint a token and put a lot of hype on it. And many of these startups haven't built or deployed their projects that they've never shipped anything. But the hype around their token has been so great. And whenever you ask the fundamental questions, they scream FUD. So are we in a place now where those who speak truth are being attacked, and those who, continue to propagate hype, i.e. falsehoods, are being embraced? Look at Terra, for example. A year before it imploded, many people were asking the tough questions. What are your fundamentals? What's your securitization? What are your metrics? How do you intend to collateralize? And those people were called fraudsters. They were called charlatans. They screamed them out of the conversation. And look at what happened, because many disasters are avoidable. So do you think we are in a place now where people can continue to attempt to speak truth to the ecosystem in light of, everything being tokenized? Or do you think we still have a long way to go?
I think long way to go, because I think we need a more severe bear market that will cleanse out all these things. And of course, influencers are being tracked. They have their videos, they have their social media. Of course, they can delete the posts, but still there are people who are capturing everything. And I think the so-called utilities must be also met. But if you want to create a project that has the really nice utility, people expect that you deliver it overnight. And that is another assumption, that Web3 is super fast thing that can capture the value immediately. I would say great projects, great things only comes step-by-step process. But of course, if you don't deliver any fundamentals over a year when the project is live, I would say there's no point of having that. And I would say also the space is pretty much full of people who are either haven't worked in a corporate environment for a longer time, or haven't led a team in a company, or haven't been like a senior experience that doesn't capture the so-called business value. They don't understand business cases, how they can utilize it. Because if more people would be thinking from the so-called service provider side, like how we can capture this business side, what kind of features we could bring in that could be used with the token. Otherwise, like, I don't know, NFTs with also the tokens, like for example, Yacht A Club, like it's ridiculously overpriced, and what you have is like ape token airdrop. I mean, what's the point? You can now buy, I don't know, Gucci clothes, right? Or what was the so-called utility added now? And like, you can buy with anything clothes. So what's the biggest utility for that? I mean, that's the thing. Like, it lacks like responsible people, accountable people in the space who wants to turn around the so-called blockchain technology and Web3 space into just something more than an DApp-based networks that are just shilling their projects with influencers and not delivering any kind of like value to also Web2 space. Because what initially we want to have is more users coming from Web2 space rather than, I would say, collecting more Web3 users to your project once it is successful. Like we want to capture actually Web2 users more than Web3 because Web3 will always be there. They're just moving around always, you know, it's the same amount. Just, it's,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just,
It's like going to conferences. You go to all those crypto conferences and you see the same people over and over and over. And at some point, you start wondering, like, is it time to start going to alternative conferences like music industry conferences or manufacturing conferences or, you know, CRM conferences or carpentry conferences or art conferences or banking conferences? Because all those big industries today largely exist in Web 2. Okay. And if the goal is to bring them in, then we have to go into their ecosystems. But if we keep hammering the same messages and interaction in the same environments, going to the same events with the same people, then are we by design our own worst enemy?
I think we are kind of locked into a sector where everybody's fighting everyone, but actually we have the same goal. But then, like, what's the angle there? What's the point of it? Because I'm actually more concentrated now on participating in events where blockchain is not mentioned. For example, beginning of October, we have been invited to speak about blockchain technology to one Baltic state's biggest forum events, where majority are just Web2 startups and companies, and around like 17 countries going to be there. I would say those are the places where we are actually onboarding much more people. But then again, why these forums in Web3 space are happening and again, they just want to show off to other Web3 users, hey, I have something new thing, just come to me, don't you go there, you know? Again, they're just reallocating the same user base, and that's all. And then it's splitted by chains and ecosystems like Ethereum, we have Cosmos now, Avalanche, and so forth. And again, we are not onboarding actual new users.
Exactly. And that's that eternal issue. And when you bring that up, I think many times, because I've seen teams who build exactly what you just said. You know, they build very good, cool tools, but all they do is brag about it on Twitter. Like, it actually doesn't solve any problems. The people that should be using it should be coming from the Web2 space, but they just build it with Web3 users in mind, and they go on Twitter and they brag about it, and that's the end of it. So, which leads me to another question. Do you think human morality comes from within ourselves or comes from outside based on what we perceive from others?
I would say stronger people are depending on their inside rather than outside, because many, I would say, great men who are inventors and creating innovations, when nobody gave a shit about their idea and things, that is when they just depend on themselves and inside of your kind of hunch, the feeling that never fades away. And then if you pursue this inside feeling and you have these morality foundations in place to take the steps rather than looking outside what kind of like circumstances you have, that is when great things are actually built, discovered, and also innovation happens. Because I would say we are atoms, right? If you're displaced in a hardship situation, my understanding is that I'm going to be moving faster rather than slower, because I'm going to be reacting to it rather than ignoring it. So if around people or circumstances are putting more pressure on me, I will not be the one hiding away or slowing down. I will be actually going much more faster than it was before, thanks to the hardships, thanks to the outside environment that is giving me this impulse to solve this situation or to go to the next stage with big changes. So
That's interesting. I'm going to quote that because that's a very logical perspective. We are indeed all atoms, and whenever we are stimulated or disturbed, we react. So now, alter and alter mail and the growing need for privacy. Do you think we're entering a new era of self-sovereignty?
I definitely do believe that. But again, we'll not be able to capture everyone. Many, I would say, again, Web3 space, reallocations and comparisons and everything else. I do believe that we are always in a common goal. And if we partner everybody and just say like, if you need this, use that. If you need that, please use that. And if we combine this collaborative approach, then I would say it's much more bigger impact. And I would say like self-sovereignty is really needed when it also comes to communications, because we are dependent on, I would say, all the things that we are communicating with: Telegram, browsers, emails. Emails are 30 years old or more, but still people are using email protocols. But why? It's so old. Why do you still need to use it? And then people are just enhancing the filters so you don't get spam, but filters are actually disabling you from your clients to receive messages. Then again, your email could not even be delivered at some point because of those filters again. It is easy to get your email, easy to spam, easy to utilize everywhere else. And I think that should be changed. With self-sovereign identities, and platforms should start to use it, maybe as a registration tool already, start to use alternative communications, and definitely can always jump on Alter.
Yes, I surely look.
But yeah.
I mean, once Alter gets on the active set, I look forward to delegating to you guys for sure, because just the philosophical driver, why Alter exists, and the philosophy behind why you're building what you've built. I think that is the justification for why people should embrace Web3, because for freedom to exist, it must be decentralized. And self-sovereignty, personal agency, the right to privacy, those things are a fundamental human right. And we all owe it to each other to support those efforts. Now, finally, do you think governments have the authority to regulate what people do beyond law enforcement and organization?
I think they can do whatever they want. If certain parties who have been elected, I don't know, for 4 years, they can do whatever they want. Of course, organizations can interrupt it. People can try to interrupt it, but if it's called to change the law, that is beyond the law as well, and activities that are not considered as criminal activities, they can regulate that. We can already see that in Europe that they will need to share the data and have an access to, for example, to Telegram. So that means all data that's been on Telegram will be accessible. What does it mean for users? you better watch out what do you type. That's all. Like, because everything that is said on internet, any threats, any scams, any things, it will be admittable. It will be verified. It will be tracked. So, and it's pretty crazy that actual governments can make these laws, can enforce it, because it's possible. Again, with the word for your safety on the internet.
And that's the key word, for your safety, which I think it's always very dangerous when another human being or another entity tells you they're doing something in your best interest. The question is always quo bono. Who benefits? Okay. If you put government in charge of the desert will run out of sand. That's how much trust we have in institutions of state. Now, that being said, they do have a role to play. But I always come back to a fundamental fact. That is, we as free citizens came together and agreed to be bound by a set of edicts that we call laws or constitution. And in furtherance of that, we elected fellow citizens to be custodians of those rules we all agreed to be bound by. To ensure the effectiveness of that institution, we also agreed to pay taxes in order to fund the implementation of those rules we agreed to be bound by. Somewhere along the lines, those who we elected forgot that we, as tax-paying citizens, elected them, and we have the right to unelect them, because at the end of the day, we are the full faith and credit of whatever institutions of state we elected in place. I believe blockchain is powerful. I believe in decentralization. I do strongly believe that platforms and renegades and teams like Alter that are building decentralized, privacy-first, user-first tools that ensures people's information, their security, their privacy, self-sovereignty remains within their own control and their domain without fear, favor, or limitation based on race, gender, creed, religion, geographic location, wherever they are. I believe teams like that should continuously be supported. I definitely look forward to having you again on this podcast, and I will continue to check in. I look forward to getting you on the active set so I can delegate to Alter. I look forward to using Alter. Look forward to talking about
it's
Alter.
Already active.
Looking forward to a lot of things downstream. And to wrap this up, I'm going to ask you 3 questions, but I'm going to give you 3 options, and you have to select one. Okay? You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Ready. So, if you could meet one of 3 people, one of the following 3, pick one. Genghis Khan, King Charles, or Elton John?
King Charles.
All right. Second question. Vitalik, John McAfee, or Winston Churchill?
John McAfee.
I like that. Third, Porsche, Harley Davidson, or Lamborghini?
I would say Porsche.
All right. Well, I drive a Porsche, so 2 out of 3. That's awesome. Well, that being said, Oskar, thank you very much for joining Thanos Node. I will definitely be keeping up with what's going on with Alter. Plenty of things downstream. And again, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you as well. For the first actual question, I want to take Genghis Khan because I understand what like. I would say always I would choose it. Why King Charles? Because I would ask him actually why you created this royal family and why it's needed.
Dude, I have a lot of questions for that man. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. because when you look around, like when these royal families came up and where they created it, there was this Monty Python movie about the so-called kingdoms, and I liked one of the scenes where the peasants are questioning the so-called king, like, "Who elected you? Who are you?"
Yeah, where do you come from? Like,
I
who
can
made
send it to you, but yeah.
You just get up one day and you just declare, I'm king. So yeah,
I'm your king.
you just declare, right? It's a declaration, right?
Yeah.
You just declare, I'm king, and yeah, everybody worship me from now. I'm king, and I'm going to take 1% of everybody's income and farm production, and I'm king, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I should proclaim myself king. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Wow.
Yeah. All right.